Okay, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first international seminar of our course called the project, Sport International Politics in Europe. And today I'm very glad to welcome Guido Battaglia from the Center of Sport and Human Rights, who is going to give us a lesson on sports and human rights. And then, as we have already talked and discussed, after this 45 minutes speech, we will open the floor for a discussion. And so I will think about the questions that you ask to Guido. So Guido, the floor is yours. I put now silence here the microphone so there are no you are not disturbed by noise, and we are to listen to your speech.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay, I only see, I don't see the audience. Oh, you're moving now. Okay, perfect. I can see everyone. Good morning. Well, first of all, I would really like to thank Nicola for this opportunity. It is really a pleasure to join the conversation. Importantly, I hope that this will be helpful and also that you will enjoy. Just a few words to introduce myself. I am Guido Battaglia. I was born and raised in Milan, studied law, and I moved to Geneva in Switzerland in 2008, basically acknowledged that international affairs and international relations were really my passion. So I held different roles with different organizations here in Geneva, including the World Economic Forum and a company called the Institute for Human Rights in Business. And it has been since 2018 that I've been working with the Center for Human Rights. Let's see. I'll move to the next slide. Wow. So what I would like to present today, first of all, I would like the discussion to be as interactive as possible. I really look forward to your questions, to your comments, and to really discussing some of the items that I will be presenting. Here are some of the points that I will be addressing today. I would like really to move from some key concepts to some key concrete examples. And then I will illustrate the framework of reference to address the topic of sport and human rights. And last, I would also like to share some information regarding the Center for Sport and Human Rights, which is the organization I have the pleasure of working with. Any questions at which you can nod me, you can raise your hand if you have any questions, otherwise we can go ahead. So, as I said, I would like this to be interactive. So I thought about 3 questions that I would like to share with you to start the conversation. And looking from the perspective of 3 key actors in the ecosystem, share some initial questions with you. First of all, you are a sports federation, and a country with a problematic human rights record has bid to host one of your events. Do you award country, yes or no? Second question, you're a sponsor with a 20 years contract with a sports championship. The sports body has awarded an international competition to a state with abusive labor laws. You have reputational concerns. Should you remain a sponsor? You're a broadcaster filming tennis in a state extremely limited. The fans start a pro-democracy protest. Do you keep the camera on it, and do your commentators say anything? There is no right or wrong answer to this question. I think that what I would like to do with these questions is to bring up some concrete dilemmas and some key questions that actors in the sport ecosystem have to ask themselves when it comes to sport and human rights. Any comment, any reaction to this question? share some views on that. We will get back to these questions also later. But
and Guido, there was
will be absolutely welcome.
There was some comments. I leave the microphone open now.
I could not hear you, Nicola. Can you say it again? Sorry.
Okay, sorry. I said that before there was the microphone off, so it was impossible for you to listen any potential comment. There were no comment, but anyway, now is more interactive, so you can directly ask questions.
Okay. Anyone willing to feel body or a sponsor, caster, and outline situation, or she would.
Don't be shy. They are shy.
They are shy. No problem. No problem. We can get back to these questions later. I hope that the framework I will be presenting can help you clarify how can this dilemma be addressed. So I would like to get back then to some key concepts and principles. And what all these examples was that we were talking about human rights. We're talking about labor laws. We're talking about freedom of expression, and we're talking about human rights performance in the first example. What do we mean when we talk about human rights? Again, any volunteer? Why do we talk about human rights, and what does human mean, and what do we mean when we talk about rights? Anyone willing to take a shot? Don't be shy, guys.
You are in a political science class, so supposed to be able to answer to this question.
Are we talking about values? Are we talking about things that apply to some people but not to others? Are we talking about things that everyone shares? Or what's your impression when we talk about human rights? What is one thing when it comes to sport? Let's connect it with sport. Are human rights abused in sport?
Yes, as we are seeing recently.
Qatar. Did I hear Qatar? Correct. That's correct. Human rights abuse, in particular at the construction level. Yes.
And so it has to be something that theoretically must be recognized to everyone, but in practice it doesn't happen so often. So if we look at human rights in sport, but in general, we have to think as something that is deeply embedded in the human figure, as we intend in a Western point of view, from our ideal evolution, the declaration of human rights during the French Revolution and so on. So we intend to perceive human rights as something that must be guaranteed to everyone and with specific values in our mind when we tend to identify what human rights are.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the aspirational nature of human rights, something that everyone aspires at, something that we don't see basically being delivered on a daily basis. That's really, really true. I heard also reference to the Western conception, and there are many discussions around that. So these are very, very good points. Any other comments? Happy to move on. The audio is not fantastic. I can hear you guys. Okay, we can, if there are no other comments, we can move on. And just some of the things that were just mentioned. Universal. We talk about human rights because of their universal nature. They apply to everyone. We talk about their inalienable nature of human rights, in a sense that cannot be taken away from one person to the other. And of course, we talk about the indivisible nature of human rights. You cannot for the spelling mistake, but it is not that some of them apply, some of them apply. And then the interesting part, the second part of rights. Laws protect them. National law, states are when it comes to human rights, and there are specific conventions on children, women, racial discrimination, indigenous people. Individuals and groups have rights, and this has been contextualized, in particular following the Second World War, in a system that, of course, the main point of reference is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Human rights law governs how individual human beings live in society and with each other, as well as the relationship with the government and the obligation that the government has towards them. It requires governments to do certain things to fulfill human rights and prohibits them from doing others. And individuals also have responsibilities. They must respect the human rights of others. And very interestingly, not only individuals, but also companies have responsibilities, including sport bodies. And we will get back to this point. Here are some examples of human rights as listed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in the covenants, and the other treaties that constitute the international recognized human rights system. Freedom from discrimination, freedom from cruel, inhuman degradation, right to remedy by the competent tribunal, freedom from arrest and detention, freedom from expression, something heavily discussed in the world of sport, right to peaceful assembly, freedom from forced or compulsory, right to equal pay for equal work, right to organize and collectively bargain, freedom from discriminations. These are some examples. Of course, there are more. And a nice quote from Eleanor Roosevelt, in particular, the last paragraph. We're talking about, our everyday life. It's not something, oh my God, human rights, we'll be talking about things that are far away from us. We're talking concern us. No, they apply on a daily basis also to our life. And unless these rights have meaning in our daily life, well, if they don't, they have little meaning anywhere. Without concerted and close to home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world. So principles such as dignity, fairness, equality, respect of the human rights system, an aspirational set of rights that apply on a day-to-day basis. How do these human rights apply to sport, and what are the human rights issues that we see in the world of sport? Here you can see some you read about these topics. Hopefully you also get passionate about these topics, and you see it on an almost daily basis. Freedom from slavery and decent working conditions. Workers on sporting events, construction sites are not paid their wages on time in full, and are not able to leave their job if they choose. Sounds familiar, correct? In one month, we're going to Qatar for the World Cup. Clearly, there were issues on this topic. Freedom from discrimination. We all go to the stadium and we see players being booed, being because of the color of skin, but also about eligibility criteria for competitions, in particular around trans-sex, intersex athletes, eligibility criteria, how human rights apply to this context. Peaceful assembly, and here we're talking more about fans, local communities. There were many examples in Brazil before the Rio Olympics, before the World Cup, but I personally experienced something similar in Paris at the Champions League final only a few months ago. So really things that happen very regularly. Equal pay for equal work. You know this person in the picture? Who is she? Exactly. Captain of the US football team, women's football team, and of course, campaigns, which was successful. Freedom of thought, conscience, religion, discussions around wearing a hijab for doing sport or not. There were issues in basketball. There were discussions recently in France, in many other countries. Juridical. Sorry, anyone wanted to intervene or no? No, sorry. Okay. Effective remedy by a competent tribunal. And this is very specific to sport. Lack of access to remedy for human rights violations in sport. Lack of access to justice for construction workers, building sport facilities. So is there a right, is there a way basically to go to the right tribunal to see basically remedy and harms being addressed in the context of sport for athletes, but also for other groups? Very long, huge discussion also linked to Lex Sportiva and basically how the system of sport works. Freedom of expression, I think that we all know, all remember 1968, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, and of course, the third man from Australia, Greg Norman, oh my God, got his name. But of course, what can be said, what cannot be said, what kind of activism can be done in the context of Amiga sporting events. And again, very connected with Qatar, rights of migrant workers, trafficking, exploitation, debt bondage, and all the issues that we have been hearing about almost on a daily basis now. But of course, it's been an issue for many years. Some other examples. Freedom of association and effective recognition of collective bargaining. Very, very interesting, important topic in the world of sport. What are the rights of athletes? Do athletes have the same rights as other groups? And what are the rules that affect the workplace? And what are imposed unilaterally on athletes? And what is the recognition in decision-making processes that affect them? Standard autonomy, I think that the dialogue of transgender people, intersex people, of course, very interesting. Criteria, public health protocols, also when it comes to pandemics, health situations, and protection of athletes. About adequate housing, of course, again, we can think about Brazil, but many other places where residents were displaced or other population were basically unlawfully asked to leave demolition for sporting events and facilities. We talk about abuse in sport. I think that there was a report that was issued very recently about abuse in the Women US Soccer League, Football League. Gymnastics. We know about scandals involving presidents of football associations in Afghanistan, in Haiti, scandals of sexual abuse of athletes in Gabon, in Kenya, in Mali, in the basketball context, in many other areas. Of course, this is just the top of the iceberg, but we know that cases of abuse are really everywhere. Freedom from arbitrary arrest or detention when there are political protests, in the context of Amiga sporting events, police brutality, and issues in particular in autocratic regimes, but also everywhere. Child rights issue, cases of child labor in the construction, on supply chains linked to mega sporting events. Those who are a bit older may remember in the 90s against the practice of child labor and kids stitching in Pakistan, which was basically one of the key moments for the development of the sport and human rights agenda. Mental, physical health issues, unfortunately, sexual child abuse in sport, privacy. What do organizers do with all the sensitive information and personal information they get to monitor that everything happens safely in the context of an event? And of course, employment and basically help athletes see the rights being recognized. These are just some examples. I thought that it would be interesting really to make a concrete and practical connection between human rights issues and human rights issues in sport. What I would like now to address is how this. And you may be familiar with this very powerful statement that Madiba left in 1995 in the context of the. It is true that sport and human rights have a natural alignment. We talk about harmony among nations, dignity, solidarity, fair play, sustainability. Most sport organizations promote these values, and they place great emphasis for positive social change. And they already work on areas such as gender equality, equal opportunity, anti-discrimination, integrity. And also there is a kind of institutional connection, as we are political science students here, and many sport organizations, many actors in the world of sport endorse the United Nations systems and the Sustainable Development Goals agenda, including key pillars such as peace and security, the rule of law, development, and of course, human rights. So the SDGs are really an integral part of the agenda of the world of sport. And it is clear that as the SDG recognizes human rights are a key part of it, and development cannot be achieved if people are left behind. So they're really essential human rights to this agenda. Sport supports it. And of course, this is probably the best example, of the power of sport, how sport can bring us together, and how sport can speak a language that many other sectors cannot. In my previous life, I was working with the mining sector, I was working with infrastructure, I was working with other industries. Clearly, you cannot compare, the power of the message that sport can deliver compared to other business areas or other sectors. In this, has the power to change. If he was still alive, probably Mandela will not be very happy with the way sport has been used in many instances. Some examples basically would meet his approval, but we know that there is a connection between sports and values and human rights, and this is clearly there, and we believe in this. So if there is such an alignment, why is the debate still open around how human rights apply to sport? The answer, I think, is relatively simple in a sense that while the intersection of sport and human rights dates back over generations, only recently the world of sport has begun to engage with its negative impacts. They have been doing a lot of work in engaging with the positive impacts, but when it comes to human rights issues and negative impacts, clearly this is a recent phenomenon. Here, if you can, in the slides, of the sport ecosystem. Usually, if you look at manuals, manuals, you see that with sporting institutions at the top of the pyramid, that any benefits that sport institutions get then gets automatically translated to the world of sport. The way we looked at the world of sport from a human rights perspective was basically to adopt a pyramid system, but look at a stadium and basically include at the center of the stadium the people that may be affected by sport. Positively, of course, jobs, employment, development, etc., but also negatively. And of course, athletes are at the center of the stadium, but you can see other groups such as workers, migrant workers, of course, coaches, fans, volunteers, communities, migrants, refugees, and all these examples were included in the three inner circles of this representation, may be also negatively impacted by sport. And of course, there are some groups that are more vulnerable than others, and we have included them. If you look at the outside part of the slide, you can see that we have identified some actors in the sport ecosystem. And like in a stadium, the way these actors behave has an impact on the stadium and on the people that are at the center of the stadium. If people throw things, insult athletes, we are all agree that the atmosphere is not very good. But if basically all these actors act responsibly, then of course we will move towards a world of more responsible sport. And you can see the actors we have included. Government, important role on the left. And if we move clockwise, you can see that we have included services and standard bodies, sport bodies, very important, of course, integrity, particularly when it comes to access to remedy and justice happen, professional sport, more and more developing, commercial partners investing a lot of money and having a lot of influence in the world of sport, of course, event organizers, organizing committees, bidding committees, supply chain providers, suppliers, and also education, think tanks, universities like the University of Bologna, and very, very important, civil society and human rights bodies that are those that basically can blow the whistle and can highlight also when things are. This is our representation of the sport ecosystem, and each actor in this ecosystem has roles and responsibilities. It is a very complex world, and if you think about events, it is clear that different actors have different roles, and it's not very easy always to identify who is responsible for what. One of my colleagues talked about blurred lines of responsibilities in the context of, for example, sporting events. So the question is, how can a sport body, how can FIFA, how can the International Olympic Committee, how can World Athletics, Juventus, AC Milan, Serie A, the Premier League really understand what is the role and responsibility when it comes to respect for human rights, for example, in the organization of their events? Well, this is where international law can help and support. And one framework I would like to present today, the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Why are they so important? Because they help organizations navigate one fundamental question. Where do they have responsibility for human rights and where they don't, and what it looks like? So these principles were issued by the United Nations in 2011, and they were unanimously endorsed by the United Nations Human Rights Council here in Geneva. Support of business, government, and civil society, And there are more and more youth that are developing their human rights standards. So what do these principles say? This is the key question. Representation, there are three.
Io ti sei bloccato, non ti sentiamo più.
Ok, I lost you. You guys?
Sì, ti sei bloccato.
Okay.
Now you're back.
Okay, thank you. Can I know I'm still. Do you still see the presentation? Okay.
No, the presentation. You can see the presentation, but sometimes your voice come and go.
That's really bad. Can you hear me now, guys?
Now, yes.
Okay. So I was presenting the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and the Protect, Respect, and Remedy framework, the three key pillars of this framework. And the first one is about the duty to protect against human rights abuses by third parties, including business. And while the second pillar, and this is a very interesting, responsibility to respect, which applies to corporates and non such as sport bodies like FIFA or the International Olympic Committee. The third pillar, very important, it's about access to effective remedy, and it's about making when harm happens, access to effective remedy be made available. So before pausing, I will just dive on the responsibility to respect human rights. What the responsibility to respect human rights says is that organizations have to refrain from violating human rights wherever and however they do business. This means that following the law in the local country where you go may not be sufficient, and auditing a few of their suppliers in the country may not be sufficient. Governments do not take their own duty. Organizations still have to know about the human rights impacts, and they have to take concrete steps to improve them. And the responsibility includes all human rights. You cannot only pick and choose and say, okay, I'm going to Saudi Arabia and will only focus on gender issues, but will not focus on LGBTQI issues, for example. And if you think about philanthropic activities like, building a well, building a football pitch, this is not enough. This doesn't get organizations out of their responsibilities not to have negative impacts in the places where they go. And the key element of the responsibility to respect is that companies have to perform, and the steps of human rights due diligence are included in this slide. Companies and sport organizations have to commit human rights, and then through engagement with all actors, civil societies, but all the other actors, that have knowledge and expertise in the areas where they operate, it is important to start a process of risk assessment where risks are identified and also ways basically to address these risks are identified. Knowing about these risks and issues is not sufficient though. Companies also need to show that they are aware of the issues at stage. They have to monitor progress made. They have to keep identifying the challenges and basically identify ways to communicate about the progress made, the challenges they still face, and when they're involved, of course, in human rights abuses, they also have to be involved in the process to provide remedy when things go wrong. Just wanted to double check, as I heard that there were issues with the audio. Is it working now, Nicola?
Yeah, it's working after that.
Perfect. Really sorry about that. Moving to the next slide, I would like basically to show this principle practice and in the context of the organization of mega sporting events. So here you can see the way the center identified the different stages of the mega sporting event life cycle. We start from a vision, concept, and legacy, and then they move planning and design. Then there is the kind of very important economic support that comes from sponsors and broadcasters. There is the topic of sustainable sourcing. So think about where do the materials, for building garments, what are the athletes going to wear, where do these goods basically come from, and how are they produced. Very, very important element, the construction. And again, that this was a huge issue in Qatar, for example. Then and operation moment where actors such as broadcasters are involved, competition, where the rules that are set by sport organizations are outlined and applied. And then there is the important topic of the legacy. So basically, how was the event used basically to ensure that there is a positive legacy for the population and for the local communities involved in the organization of this event. And what is very interesting to look at from a life cycle perspective is that at each stage of the life cycle, you can identify that the actors we identified in the previous ecosystem mapping exercise have different roles. When it comes to the first, it is clear that sport bodies have a lot of power because they are those that are going to award the event to a country. So clearly awarding the event, bidding, planning and designing, this is an area where we have clearly a strong responsibility and can really make sure that human rights are included in the planning of the event. There are other areas where local organizers, the local organizer committee and countries have more power. But of course, the fact that a big event like a World Cup or the Olympic Games take place in a country also allow sponsors and sport organizations basically to exert their leverage processes that we witness in the context of these countries. And as we move then to the competition moment, you can see then, again, there is a more direct involvement of actors like sport bodies, because this is where the rules regarding freedom of expression and podium celebration apply. And this is where, again, sport bodies are on the driving seat when it comes to being the main actors involved. But if you look at this ecosystem, one thing that it is pretty clear and that everyone will appreciate is that all actors are involved at different levels. And the key challenge is to basically understand the roles and responsibilities of each actor. You can see some of the examples of human rights risks at some stages of the life cycle. Bidding, planning and design, of course, land acquisition, how basically our communities, local communities treated in this situation, the environmental impacts of basically the development of infrastructure for a new sporting event, clearly corruption, big topic. If you look at supply chains and sustainable sourcing, the risks that may arise are labor abuse, the impact on local economies, child labor, health and safety standards, how are they applied? And again, no-brainer construction, migrant worker welfare, forced labor risks, dangerous condition, recruitment fees, here are now, daily basis as the World Cup. But of course, there are issues and risks in sport linked to the organization of mega sporting events. But when it comes to what we call day-to-day sport, which is basically how sport is run and conducted on a daily basis, these are some of the topics that come up. We talked about athletes and child abuse, non-discrimination, integration of everyone, of course, is a big topic, racism, corruption, governance issues, very, very key points, and also gender equality and access basically to this position and to this role for women is clearly a topic that is on top of the agenda. I would like now to pause 1 second because I'm conscious that I'm sharing a lot of information, and I would just like to pause 1 second and to highlight some of the key points that I tried to transfer with this presentation. The first one is that sport is a very complex ecosystem, and risks and issues arise at each stage, for example, of the life cycle, but also in day-to-day sport. And the other point I wanted to highlight is that the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and the human rights due diligence that is required, they offer a framework for all actors to define roles and responsibilities. So these are some of the points that I tried to convey with this presentation. And again, a small pause before we go to a timeline and an overview of what happened over the last 10 years, where have we seen happening, and how basically these principles are being implemented by the world of sport. Any question at this stage?
Yeah, I have a question regarding. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the gender pay gap between male and females, especially in like private leagues. So I'm not talking about the male soccer team, the national team, but about just football or basketball leagues. Do you think it's like a matter of human rights violation, or it's more like the way business is conducted? So if like male games generate more revenue, clubs can afford to pay them more, whereas if like female games do not generate that much revenue, clubs cannot afford to pay them as much as male clubs do?
Excellent question. I think that at the core there is a human rights point, in a sense that here we're talking about non-discrimination. And the economic considerations that you made, of course, is also important. And the way my boss, who basically was the goalkeeper of the United States national team that won the first in 1991, basically the way she addresses this question is always, what are the steps that sport bodies are taking to basically ensure that at the economic level, the two different categories, can go towards the right direction. There is a gap now, but what is important is that it's like a chicken-egg situation. The more you invest in this, the more you will see the return, and then the more basically the investment will pay off. This is our approach to the economic aspect of this, but I think that at the core there is clearly a human rights element.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you.
Any other question? I will go ahead. I'm not hearing anything. I hope that you guys can still hear me. So here is a timeline of human rights crisis, and child labor uncovered in manufacturing of sporting goods in Pakistan. We may remember, these discussions in the 90s, those that were old as a young. But then, of course, the increasing tendency to award mega sporting events, to different areas around the world, I think raised more awareness of human rights issues. Not because there are not human rights issues in Europe or in the US, but also I think because the kind of appreciation of the level of risks and understanding of them increased the 2008 Olympics in Beijing. One precedent that is not really discussed and maybe not really in our memories, but it was pretty bad, is the 2010 incidents that involved the plans basically to organize. And actually what happened is that they was stripped of the rights to organize the Commonwealth Games because of delays and the issues that we see. Then a clear year important year for FIFA. The World Cup was awarded to Russia and Qatar. In 2014, some NGOs went to OECD, the Organization for Economic Development and Cooperation in Paris, and basically they asked questions around the organization of the Formula One Grand Prix in Bahrain and the way human rights defenders and political opponents were treated in Bahrain. 2015 is also a very NCP, so the National Contact Point, which is part of this the OECD, accept the first complaint of an international trade union called Building World Workers International against FIFA. In 2014, 2015, civil society and trade unions started to get extremely vocal about and labor rights issues in Qatar. And perfect storm for FIFA, because 2015 is also the year when you may remember the FBI entering the Barolac and arresting FIFA officials on corruption charges. It dates 2018, the huge case in US gymnastics, and 2020 is the year of the to ban for life Afghanistan and Haiti Football Federation's president views. I don't, of course, have any ambition to be comprehensive and fully including all the over the last 10 years, but I thought that it would be helpful to provide you with an overview of the crisis. This slide, you can see some of the responses and the developments. How is the sport and human rights agenda embedding human rights principles, and where do we stand? This is the effort included in this slide. Discussions around sustainability standards, mechanism to address wrongdoing during the games is something that started to discuss in London in 2012. Glasgow Commonwealth Games is the moment where human rights was issued by the first sport organization, which is the Commonwealth Games Federation. And this is the moment where the patron of the Center for Sport and Human Rights and former High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mary Robinson, also sent a letter to FIFA urging them to integrate human rights in their policies and activities. In 2016, Professor John Ruggie, who is basically the person who developed the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, was asked by Human Rights Report called For the Game, for the War, where he basically outlined between FIFA and human rights and what are the steps that FIFA can take to address human rights issues in its work and its organization. 2017 is a very, very important year because some of the biggest sport organizations in the world introduced human rights criteria into requirements. This was done by the International Olympic Committee. This was done by FIFA, and this was done. One thing that was also done by FIFA, and they were the first towards this, is to publish a human rights policy and basically outline how human rights should be embedded and apply to their statutes, to their constitutions, and to their way FIFA works. Since then, FIFA also created a human rights working group. People with specific human rights expertise, and of course, as the other organizations did, they for the upcoming events. The first example was the bidding requirement for the FIFA 2026 FIFA World Cup, which was the moment when the Center for Sport and Human Rights was established. There were steps that were taken also at the international policy level. Ministers of sports that are working in the context of a UNESCO working group, NGPs apply to the world of sport. And in 2020, you can see that also the IOC took additional steps, basically towards embedding human rights principles. And there was a first strategy that was published with the support of the former United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zaid Al-Hussein, and a human rights expert called Rachel Davis. And there were also steps that were taken in terms of worker rights with a global dialogue forum on decent work in the world of sport that was hosted by the International Labour Organization. Very, very development. 2022 is the approval of the IOC of a strategic framework of human rights, which outlines the responsibilities of the IOC as an organization, basically organizing mega sporting events and as the leader of the movement, including different responsibilities and the set basically targets that the IOC would like to achieve throughout the next year. Very recent news, I think that this came in 2020, in September. So just a few words about my organization and how the work of my organization basically fits in this context. One thing that I hope was clear is that defining the role and responsibility of organization is a task which requires commitment, capacity, resources, and willingness to engage with other constituents. One thing that is really typical and belongs to the board is the fact that it is only through meaningful engagement with all affected groups and their representatives that so NGOs, civil society unions, they really play an important role to advance the discussion. And the organization I represent, the Center for Sport and Human Rights, was established in 2018 by a group of stakeholders to advance a world of sport that fully respects and promotes human rights through collective action. So basically, we are not a campaigning organization, but our objective is to be the global center of expertise with sport and human rights. And here you can see the list of the organizations basically that for sport and human rights. You can see that there are governments, there are agencies from there are sport bodies, there are NGOs and trade unions, and broadcasters, and together the objective is to advance a world of sport that fully respects and promotes human rights by generating awareness, building capacity, and generating value through collective action. And here is and full engagement, sharing knowledge. The first objective the center can achieve is to generate awareness. It's basically for how sport and human rights connect and what are the roles and responsibilities to advance together the human rights agenda. By increasing awareness, you can move to the next step, which is building capacity. Building capacity means that to address human rights issues, you need to have the right expertise in your applies to Coca-Cola, as it applies to FIFA, as it applies to any organization that basically is involved in the sport ecosystem. And if you know, okay, what are the issues at stake, you can invest accordingly and also understand where the opportunities are. There is a process of self-accountability and basically promotion of human rights diligence that we hope will become more and more the business as usual rule for the organizations that are engaging with the Center for Sport and Human Rights. This is our theory of change. The plan is not to get it delivered by the end of the year. It's a very long journey, and these are the principles that are at the core of the work of the Center. I mentioned some of them already in my presentation, and they are, of course, fully aligned with the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. One point that I want, and it's one of the questions I get more often, is, well, does this mean rights approach is needed? Does this mean that can apply and can bid for hosting a mega sporting event? The answer is no. This is not the world we would like to see is a world where there is a convergence between sport and human rights, where basically the positive message of sport also aligns with the human rights message. And of course, the mission is to advance sport together, is not to fix a country. So the idea is, if a country would like to host an event, the idea would be basically to conduct all the actors' human rights due diligence to make sure that when it comes to the impact linked to the event, harm is minimized, harm is addressed, and the human rights dialogue advances. To be clear, the objective is not to have only events in Norway or in Denmark or in Iceland. And of course, I think it's also open for discussion whether these countries have no human rights issues. I'm almost done. Here you can find some examples of the tools that we are developing, working with all the actors you saw in the previous slides. We are basically developing tools and guidance to help actors in the ecosystem address human rights challenges. If you look at the bottom left, for example, championing human rights in the governance of sport bodies basically aims at helping sport bodies that would like to include human standards in their governance and in their statutes and understand how to do it to be taken. If you look at the top right, this is just an example. The cycle is about embedding human rights from vision. Look at the different steps of the life cycle, identify the risks together, on how basically these issues can be addressed. This is an ongoing work. It is and the objective is to capture as much good practice and information from the actors in the ecosystem. Center can really be an actor that really shares best practices with the rest of the world. I'm approaching the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for having listened to me until now. And just a couple of slides on what our partners say about the center and what is the role of the center in the international context. This is a statement from former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, really on the role of the center on sport and human rights. General of the International Labour Organization, also connecting the different actors and sport and human rights. And from our patron, Mary of the center to share best practice and build capacity with the rest of the world. This is the last slide. Just some key points at the end of this presentation. There is a natural alignment between sport and human rights. but sport should embed human rights principles in its mechanism to address human rights issues. Internationally recognized standards provide the lens and the framework for all constituents to define roles and responsibilities and to advance towards the convergence between sport and human rights. Conducting human rights due diligence means talking and meaningfully engage on an ongoing basis with people whose life may be affected. All actors in the ecosystem last play a very important role to advance together towards a world of responsible sport. So it to open itself to new challenges. It is a journey, and this will not be fixed next week or next month. And this is a huge opportunity also for people who are looking at opportunities in the world of sport, because political human rights expertise hopefully will be more and more needed in this context and skills. So I will stop here. I will stop presenting, and thank you again for having listened to me. And now I'm all ears. I really want to hear from you about questions. Was not clear? What would you like to discuss? You're on mute. I saw that.
Okay, so now you are totally to ask, as I said, both every kind of question to clarify some aspect that Guido Battaglia has highlighted during his presentation. Unfortunately, the audio sometimes was not perfect, and it's a pity, but then I think the concept were there. And Guido, then you can share the slide, so I will share with the student as well. But you can ask every. We can focus, for example, on some element. You are free to ask any type of question. And so let's see. I open the floor. Then I have some questions as well. But if the students have more, I will ask you privately. So. Let's see who want to start, and also you can also go on some specific topic that Guido has also introduced, but is able to answer to almost everything. Yeah.
Okay, so can you hear me? Because I'm in the. Okay, so I have a question about specifically the Qatar case. When there is a bidding for the country, the event will be hosted, shouldn't there be some kind of pre-investigation about the laws and that I feel like the human rights are spreading awareness and then investigating after the fact. So because there is a law in Qatar, labor law, where it says that only Qatari people, workers, can so make trade unions, but they are employing migrants, so they can do anything, and even the Qatari they join the international covenant of what is it called, human rights and social rights. But then there was a question of who can form trade unions, and by that they formed committees, but they were consisted of the same employers and workers, but employers who are basically doing the harm. So my question again is, shouldn't there be some kind of pre-rules or checks about the country, not just the basic stadium capacity and more oriented on human rights? so that this doesn't happen again. Sorry, I talked too much.
It's an excellent question, and I think that really raised the question of what kind of human rights should sport bodies conduct before the event is awarded. I think that the question that you were raising about the conditions of workers in Qatar, the fact that only Qatari people can join some associations, that migrant workers are excluded from that. I think that the key point is, has this been addressed before awarding the World Cup? No, the answer is no. So the steps that FIFA took afterwards are, in my view, positive, in a sense that there is a kind of learning of the experience from the past, from 2010. And as you've seen from 2015, 2016, steps are now being taken basically to include human rights requirements in the bidding process. And one aspect, of course, is labor law. How is the infrastructure for the event going to be built? How are workers going to be treated? What kind of commitments are you making? What challenges do you see? And how can this be addressed? I think that, yes, in an ideal world, this should be one of the key requirements before awarding the event to other countries. Does this answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Other?
I ask whether, in your opinion, is it a winning strategy to include countries such as Qatar or Russia for major sport events, or it would be better to sanction them in advance after conducting an investigation before organizing the actual event? Or is it better to include them in order to responsibilize them and to make them part of the...
Not really. Is the question about Russian athletes? Is it correct? Sorry, the audio is not...
more in general, it was about the involvement of Russia, Qatar, or other countries that seems to be last and the application of human rights and allowing them to host major sport events, so that it was a winning strategy to have those countries implement human rights, or it would be better to sanction them and exclude them. I mean, I believe the preliminaries are more winning strategy, but I would ask your opinion.
It's a very good question. One thing that we could observe, decision basically not to include, to exclude basically Russian athletes and Russian representatives for some federations, you know, from the work since February 24. Interestingly, was not done on the basis of human rights considerations. There were, of course, the kind of juridical link that was made was with the Olympic truce when it comes to the IOC, but also when you look at the decisions from CAS that we are now seeing following the basically the recourse that by Russia, you can see that also the Russia's request is based on human rights consideration, and the answer from CAS is based on issues like safety, security, making sure that there are no accidents during the event. So I think my view is that if sport bodies add in the principles and in their statutes human rights considerations, this will help them provide some guidance and have a kind of athletes and people first approach to issues. But in the context of Russia, clearly what made the huge difference are political and economical consideration. And probably one link that we may see here is also the alignment between sport organizations and sport institutions with the Western agenda. I think that this was clearly an element that led to this decision.
And regarding the no, because when we spoke, there is a terrible echo for you, right? Is correct?
No.
No? Okay, so it's just for us. Okay. Okay. Anyway, when someone award a mega event, as Guido showed in the slide, in 2010, Qatar and Russia obtained the FIFA World Cup, at that point, the impact on the human rights agenda was very low. Now it's starting to become an issue, as the underline is with 2014 Glasgow Commonwealth game, that international bodies start to think about the idea to put human rights in the agenda for the process. So Qatar and Russia is somehow another geographic in another era, no? More or less. Anyway, other question? Yes.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
First of all, thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. Yeah, I have a question regarding the life cycle of young events that you present, the slide that you present. And I want to know your opinion about the possible outcomes or the possible legacy of the Qatar World Cup. Yeah, and I base this question on my personal background because I'm from Brazil. So the 2014 World Cup, and not only the World Cup, but the Olympic Games, are seen in the public opinion as a disaster in Brazil, not only because of the semi-final against Germany, the 7-1, not only because of that, but because of the economic, the political, and the social aspects of the game. So what are the possible outcomes of the legacies of the Qatar 2022 World Cup?
I think that the legacy where is really where the legacy is really at stake. Society. So the key question.
Can you repeat, because you were blocked, so freeze, so restart, and let's hope that
The connection is not that good. So sorry about that. So I think that one legacy will be really questioned is how migrant workers will be treated after the World Cup. Okay, can you hear me?
Go then.
There are a couple of concrete requests from trade unions, and one is the establishment of a migrant workers center. And this is a request that came from Build World Workers International and FIFA. A lot of support from many other actors in the system. How this will be accommodated, how this will be resolved, I think that there is a question of compensation and remedy, which involves both Qatar and FIFA, which was launched by Amnesty International and by Human Rights Watch. And it is about, can we envisage a kind of financial compensation for the families of the migrant workers who lost their life in the construction of this? And of course, there are political elements, GPs, but the dialogue is evolving. We don't know what is going to happen with this. And about the reforms, you know that since the National Labour Organization is working in Qatar, there were
freeze again. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Now, yes, now it's better. And now, no. No. They are completely freezing.
Okay.
Ecco, now, yes, try.
I was talking about the labor reforms that on paper some reforms took place. This is where its legacy question, how they're going to be implemented, and what kind also of examples they can set with the rest of the region. Another element, of course, there are many discussions around how the LGBTQI community will be treated in Qatar. There is a potential for a legacy there, although clearly the discussion is at an early stage. But I think that labor reforms and diversity and inclusion will be some of the legacy of the Qatar World Cup.
Guido, because I know that you are going to Qatar, what will be the role of the center in the weeks you are going to be there?
Yes, I'm going to Qatar on a unique and pioneering initiative that we have been FIFA. If you look at the life cycle that I showed to you, there is the competition moment, the games time moment. What we are doing is that we are deploying experts, human center, but also from other civil society representatives. And our task will be to monitor what happens. Of course, we're not going to intervene. To report what happens if someone has a rainbow next to the stadium. What happens if fans from a certain team, with the fact that beer will not be served at the beginning, before the game, people be treated. So we will basically be part of a system that expertise will convey messages to FIFA. There will be also, of course, a system of really, really urgent and requires intervention. To basically interview fans and understand what the experience is. It is a kind of first in a kind experiment of human rights due diligence at games time. It is the first time we partner with a sport organization to do this. I think that it will be great. I really look forward to this. And we hope that this can be kind of an example of best practice that can be adopted in the context of other. Of course, only covers games time and what will happen during the competition. There is not much that can be done, for example, regarding construction or regarding earlier stages of the life cycle.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. So is it true in your opinion that hosting a tournament can improve the condition of a country? And if the answer is yes, did something change in Beijing or Sochi or China and Russia? At the tournaments, did something change? Did the condition improve? Like in a human rights perspective?
I hope you can hear me. No. So the question is whether the condition. Yes. Okay, so the answer is from a human rights perspective, the first event that will include human rights provisions at the beginning of the life cycle will be United.
Can you repeat which one is the event it is?
Sure. I'm saying that perspective, the first event. Can you hear me? So from a human rights perspective, the first event that will embed human rights principles and requirements as of the beginning of the life cycle will be Paris for the IOC and United 2026 for the World Cup. So Basically, these for Beijing, and we're not in place for Russia. I can tell you probably that the answer to your question is no, anyway.
Yeah.
Apart from this first experiment about monitoring Qatari's condition now, I would like to know how your organization and also you on your daily work, how you put into practice the principles, the guidelines of the organization, how do you also, and if you interact with sport institution, international organization, or the governments?
Again, line. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, how do we interact with sport bodies? Is this the question?
Yes, also, how do you do your daily works? Like, how do you transform theory into practice?
So there are, I would say, three elements. There is the element of dialogue. So the center's mission is really to facilitate dialogue around human rights issues. So with my colleagues, what we identify topics that, of course, require discussion, require conversation to be advanced, such as eligibility, requirements, bidding requirements for mega sporting events, freedom of expression, we can go ahead. And we basically put together a group of people that can share the different perspectives and view, and we look at it from a human rights perspective to advance. So there is a dialogue element, which is dealt with by colleagues who are probably also more expert than me to do that in terms of bringing the content. There is an element of public affairs and public relations, which is my task is basically to involve as much as possible sport bodies, but also governments and international organizations to promote together the sport and human rights agenda. So my work is to attend conferences on sustainability, to join human rights perspective, and to make sure that more and more conveyed and more embedded in what organizations are doing. And then, of course, a more behind the lines collaboration also with, for example, sustainability players that are working for an organization. And the idea is, how can we help these people have a certain knowledge of human rights issues, and how can we help them embed this principle throughout the organization? Pretty often, and this is the obstacle is not really the counterpart you have in front of you, because but in companies and also there is really a need to drive change together and to provide them with the right tools, basically, to advance their agenda internally.
Okay, Guido, thanks for your time. We have to close also the lesson, so thank you a lot for all the feedback, and then we're looking forward to hear from you after your Qatar trip, so we can maybe organize some event here in Forlì to discuss about how it ended the sport event. The students are doing a project taking some governance and analyzing how the press is speaking about the political influence of the Qatari World Cup. So thank you very much, and good luck for everything, and see you soon.
First of all, I would like to apologize. It must have been really painful to listen to me if the connection was not good. So patience. I really enjoyed that. I hope that perhaps we can do it in person. That will be much easier. Feel free to connect with me at staying in contact. And thank you very much again. Thank you, Nicole, and thank you everyone for your questions and for your.
Thank you. Ciao, io chiudo la sessione.